Folks, it's shocking to learn from a new Barna survey that theologically defined evangelicals are no more likely to vote than anyone else in American politics right now. And in fact, they're no more likely to read the news and be attentive about news in government, with less than half reporting that they even follow these type of current events. The study also confirms that around one third of evangelicals, just like the general population, as I said, do not participate in elections, which means that potentially millions, plural, millions of Christians that are eligible to vote will not participate in the 2024 presidential election. Folks, you're hearing about the importance of Christians voting. We now have it scientifically shown that we are not carrying more water in stewardship and ownership of our country than our fellow non-Christians. So today we're joined by Troy Miller, and he is the president of the National Religious Broadcasters, the NRB, and I love this organization. This organization is just one that really amplifies religious broadcasters out there. And one of them was actually named Tom Minery, who founded Family Policy Alliance. So it's a privilege to have you with us today. You issued, Troy, a statement on the new study by Dr. George Barna that is creating a lot of discussion amongst believers, certainly our audience. And you're joining us today, I understand, from Nashville, Tennessee. Troy, thank you for being with us today.
Craig, thanks for having me today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah. And so, what are your thoughts? The name of this poll is the American Worldview Inventory, and it's showing that one third of evangelicals don't vote. Now, folks, again, you'd say, but what about everybody else? One third of Americans don't vote in a presidential. The news is we've been hearing from the media that evangelicals are running up the score everywhere. And this study is verifying that we're not actually participating in voting.
Right, and it's really concerning because you would think that Christians should be some of the most informed people in our society, and some of the most concerned people in our society about who governs us. And so if you look at the Barna poll, as you said, about 30 million evangelical Christians. These are folks that actually attend church on a regular basis, and a full one third of them are not participating in the democratic process of election in this country. And it's kind of sad because that was what the founders, when the founders looked at the country and said, set this whole democratic process up, the idea was that the people were going to be the ones that drove who would govern them, and we were not going to live in some sort of elitist or monarchy. And so as Christians, we should have the biggest obligation to participate in this process, and we're not in really large numbers.
And that's what really hit me, Troy. I guess I believe some of the coverage that evangelicals were running up the score in places and could be credited with the victories. And instead, we're learning that, and I've been talking to a lot of Christians about this with our drive now to get a million more involved, that trying to talk to them about it more as it's the lesson of the talents, that the master gave you a country. What did you do with it? When you pass on, you owned it from the time you were 18, maybe if you're naturally born here, until the time you go home to Jesus. What did you do with the country, the school district, and the city and the state I gave you? And that's convicting a lot of Christians right now. But my next question for you is, kind of what's missing. You're on the national religious broadcasters. You see a lot of this cultural decay. What happens when a third of evangelical Christians are passing on participating in the culture?
Well, look, all you have to do, I think, is look around us today and look in the headlines and look how far we've come as a nation since Christians really started leaving politics aside, or being pushed out of politics. There's two sort of things going on in the background, but look at our country today. Who would have thought that we would have gone from fighting for marriage between a man and a woman to be sacred and held sacred and legal in this country, to, hey, let's not gender transition middle schoolers. kids that are 10 years old. That's where the fight's at today. That's what's happened because Christians have really stepped out of the culture and stepped out of the leadership in the culture. And today, what do we have? We have government policies that want to transition kids. We have government policies that don't understand the difference between gender, a man and a woman. We have policies today that want to have infanticide, not just allow abortion, but actual infanticide, even up to and after a child is born. We've had a massive breakdown in the family. We've seen crime across the country. So I think you could look at almost every area of society and say that the lack of righteous government has really broken down almost every single vertical we could think of.
In the thing that Troy, I agree with you, by the way, and that's a very powerful statement, folks. What I asked was, what happens in the view of if we don't participate? And I want to validate, and I want to tell you that mathematically, that Christians have the ability to run everything in America politically. And I would tell you the truth if it was different. But if that 1/3 of Christians actually participated in the election, Michigan would be a deep red state and as socially conservative as Nebraska and Alabama, and even New York and California would be very much in line with our values. So it is a participation thing. And I really, the national religious broadcasters, when there's so much decline everywhere else in media and entertainment and news out there, Troy, that national religious broadcasters continue to set the standard of high quality content in showing the durability of their business model. It's because it's authentic and it's real, and the listeners benefit from it. What are the type of things that you all are doing? Because I think both sides. I'm just trying to make an objective statement here. I was a politician. I know that we invest in trying to confuse people on the other side to scare them out of voting. And folks, you should not be scared to vote. Everybody, President Trump is saying it's safe now. We want everybody to vote absentee, whoever you're voting for. There's not a political endorsement call. We want every Christian to vote in America. But what are some of the things you're seeing the religious broadcasters doing to tell people that it's okay to vote and it's actually the right thing to do?
Yeah, so just back to your earlier question, like you said, there were 7 million Christians that did not vote in key swing states, and those states would have by easily went the other direction if Christians had stepped up. And so in the NRB and the NRB family, our members reach about 190 million households every month. Currently, a lot of our radio station participants and owners and television are running PSAs right now to help people get informed about the election, and to also help motivate churches to sign up people for voter registration. We talked a little bit about the implications of what happens if we don't vote in the country today. We see what the policies are, what happens to the directions of the country, but there are a number of organizations like your organizations that are running voter drives, helping Christians understand what it means to participate and how to participate, especially with the younger generations. We're finding that a lot in Gen Z. I was just talking to some youth pastors the other day. They are very interested in the voting process and what goes on. And they were asking, this church is actually running a voter registration for all of its 18 and older college age kids that are in the church to help them get registered to vote in their districts.
And folks, that I want to explain to folks that aspect about voting and that participation, and the difference that we look at it now is it's really that the talents. Again, you are it by voting. You already own it. You already own your school district. You already own your city. It's just a matter whether or not you're deciding to show up. And there is a lot of confusion. There's a lot of information out there, and there's a lot of apathy. But Troy, there's also a lot of hope. That we're seeing, and with this statement that you put out and what the national religious broadcasters are putting out is really more of a, it seems like a call to action and awareness, that it's more of a diagnosis to say, don't listen to the belief that evangelicals are actually controlling the political process in America. The breaking news here is we have that option but we're currently not exercising it. Is that another way to kind of look at what this poll is verifying?
I think that's exactly what this poll is verifying, that there's, as you said, there's been this thought process that Christians are very involved. They're one of the largest voting bloc groups, which they are, but they could be even larger if more people got involved. And I think you said the message there. There is hope. Look, that's the message of Christianity, and the message of the gospel is all about hope, and it's all about not giving up. We're called in Scripture over and over again to persevere. We're called to influence the culture. James calls us to put our faith to action, that our faith isn't just personal and it's not private. Christians are different from other religions in that our faith is meant to be public. It is meant to be out facing. It is meant to influence people. Even Jesus himself, when he was talking to the apostles in the upper room, and he said, he was talking about the two great commandments, and he said, look, I give you a new commandment, to love one another as I have loved you. That's a sacrificial kind of love that pushes our own personal interests down for the personal interests of those around us, both our brothers and sisters in Christ and the culture at large. We want to see the culture at large influenced by righteousness, by morality, and by virtues that help the culture move forward. And look, we've got a lot to work on today.
I love. I thank you so much for being on here with Troy Miller, the president of the National Religious Broadcasters, and wonderful organization that some of our favorite religious broadcasters, actually all the good religious broadcasters, the ones that worth listening to, are members of. A wonderful organization, and we're commenting about a press release, Troy, that you put out, talking about this Barna poll that shows that 1/3 of Christians, evangelical Christians, did not participate in the 2016 election, and the impact that it could have if they did. And we're excited about that. But you, in your press release, I'm going to, because I'm talking with you, Troy, from the National Religious Broadcasters, I'm going to bring in a theologian that we don't normally talk about, but he makes his trade over the broadcasting airwaves, and that's Bob Dylan. And he said in one of his songs, you're going to serve somebody. And one of your statements, and we know what the metaphor was of what Bob Dylan was talking about, are you going to serve Jesus? At the time, he was going through a conversion to evangelical Christianity, or the evil one. And that's kind of what we're dealing with here in America. And your statement was, you might, for evangelical Christians, you might not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you. And I think that people are starting to recognize your statement, Troy, in your press release as a fact. Both the Democratic and Republican Party, if we don't participate, they're coming after us. If we don't pay attention to them and participate, they're going to try to direct us in some way into their fold. So it's all the more reason for us to say it's not a really good option to stay on the sidelines in America anymore as a Christian.
Right. As a Christian, it's not really an option to stay on the sidelines. As you said, look at what's gone on in the last 4 years, just in this administration. And really, it's really heightened what's gone on in about the last 25 years or so. But you look at the last 4 years, we have a government today that has weaponized itself against anybody who opposes their ideology or their policies or the direction that they think the country should go in. And that weaponization has been primarily targeted at conservative Christian institutes and people. Look at how many folks within the pro-life movement over the last 4 years have been locked up. I'm coming from Nashville, Tennessee, but I live just east in Mount Juliet, Tennessee, where 10 people were protesting at an abortion clinic. They were simply praying in the hallway. It was nonviolent. They didn't cause any destruction. They were arrested. They were charged. They were convicted under what's called the FACE Act. They are now going to spend, some of them will spend 10 to 15 years in prison for that. Meanwhile, people who actually attacked pro-life clinics and centers and vandalized them, caused damage, weren't even charged. And so there were only less than a dozen charges of people who actually attacked pro-life clinics, and over 100 charges of people who were involved in just praying at pro-abortion clinics. And that, we could go on stories and stories today. Look what's going on in social media. It's primarily the Christian voice that's being silenced today, and that's created a real chill effect. And I've heard from a number of people and pastors that they're like, well, I'm afraid to speak out on issues, because if I speak out on those issues, well, then I can't talk about my gospel issues. And we're trying to tell them, look, it's all gospel issues, because you can't leave people to be governed by the ungodly. If you leave people to be governed by the ungodly, then you're going to get ungodly policies and outcomes. And do you think, as a Christian, that's really you loving your neighbor sacrificially? Or is that you just not wanting to get involved because you're worried about the kind of condemnation or the shaming that might happen for you if you actually talk about politics in public?
I love this conversation, Troy, and I'm going to have you back more. I love what you and I are talking about, and it's why I love the national religious broadcasters too, because your members are not afraid to continue to talk about stories like that when the rest of America is saying, "Can't we move on from this, folks?" We can't. We're only as good as the way we treat our most vulnerable citizens. That's been true of every society that has ever existed since God created this earth. We will be judged by how we treat our prisoners on death row, the people before they're born, the folks that are incapable of finding work for themselves, gainful employment, our veterans that are disabled, things like that, the things that are the cause of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. We don't give away charity. We know that can corrupt hearts, and people can't serve money and Jesus at the same time, and that confuses this wonderful world out of our secular friends. But here we are, Troy, today we're talking about participating more. There's no better time, and I think that you have just reminded us of the stakes, folks. There it truly is one of these situations where if it isn't in the federal policy where you thought it'll never matter to me, it's in your school district. If it's not
Right.
in your school district, it's in your community library. If it's not in your community library, in several states, Troy, you know this, and Tim Walls, I just did a video on this yesterday. Sweden and the UK started authorizing transgender surgeries. 1972, I think one of them. Somebody smart enough legislator over there said, "Give me the data on that." They got the data back. It was horrifying. It led to them issuing publicly emergency things like, the Tylenol is poison. It has poison in it. Stop taking Tylenol, right? There's listeria in the meat or whatever. Don't do it. Don't do this. America follows suit a couple months later with the Biden White House saying this will lead to an increase in suicide. This will make your kids worse. Tim Walz, then they nominate somebody running for vice president that puts it into policy, folks. And so I just wanted to drive home, Troy, I didn't want to put you up to that, but for our audience that follows these issues with what we do, and they're saying, but so what, Craig? So what, Troy? I'm telling you, so what? Joe Biden took the position of the Family Policy Alliance this summer on protecting kids, and Kamala Harris hasn't yet, and neither is Tim Walz, and the state of Minnesota is doing what Joe Biden in the country of Sweden and the UK and everybody else has done, and has said is poison for your kids. And so that's why we need to show up. If we don't take control and ownership of the government that's been given to us, this is what's going to come from it. So that was me editorializing, Troy. But tell me what your thoughts are. I mean, that's kind of the button you're pushing here too, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think your editorial was spot on, because you look at the policies, as you said, and that, by the way, that study was done in England and adopted by the entire European Union. The Germans came along aside and said, "Yep, we see the same thing." The Dutch, the Swedes, the French, and the entire European Union adopted that study and said, "Time out. We're causing more harm to these children than not." And yet, because we haven't participated as Christians from the local level, as you said, in the school board level, we have school boards across this country. Tim Walz signed a bill into Minnesota law, along with Gavin Newsom out in California, that says if your child at school tells the teacher, your little girl tells the teacher, I think I'm a boy, the teacher doesn't have to and can't inform you as a parent that they're now treating your daughter as a little boy instead of a girl, and they can refer her over to transgender, uh, quote unquote, medical experts that will help her then transition to a boy all without your knowledge. And if you get involved, they'll remove that child from your home in those states. And that's the kind of laws and policies that could get put in place when Christians don't participate. And look, we talk all the time about loving our neighbor. How is that loving our neighbor if we're going to allow our neighbors to be put under ungodly policies, harmful policies of their children? Who in this country, I think you could go Christians and non-Christians country and survey and say that parents should have the first rights when it comes to their children. But because we're not participating, we have a government that thinks they should have the first rights, and the government wants to step in and replace parents. They want to replace God. They want to replace religion. That's what we're dealing with today. And look, we're going to be the UK soon, and now that they're arresting people for not only social media statements they're making about the government, but if you make a public statement that somebody happens to turn you in, you could end up doing years in jails, tens of thousands of dollars in fines, and don't think that's knocking on our door. It's not the direction that we're going. And if we don't get involved, that's where we'll be in the next 4 years.
Troy, that's why I wanted you to be on today. Thank you for reminding us of the stakes, bringing us this clear information, folks. This comes from the folks that run the advertisements, that see what the political campaigns are doing firsthand. They're talking about the information. Many of you already follow the shows, and we encourage you to do that. We also encourage you to follow and support the national religious broadcasters, folks. They have to compete with other larger media organizations, and they are our friends, and they get abused horrifically, like so many other religious organizations. So the National Religious Broadcasters and Troy Miller, thank you so much for being with us today. This is the beginning of this talk, folks, and we hope that this has spurred you off of your metaphorical couch, wherever you are listening to the sounds of our voices, to say, I want to be a part of that solution. I want to be a part of rising up. We're not as far away from having a great awakening as you would think in demonstrating our success in the polls. It's just the margin of percentages of us. We don't all need to vote to make a difference, but I would like if we do. So let's leave this show today, Troy, with this knowledge that there's an opportunity for Christians to rise up and powerfully take a participatory role in this great country, in city and states and in school districts that we all already own through our citizenship. Thank you, Troy, for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
God bless.